Let us pray. Lord, have mercy upon us. Lord, have mercy upon us. We'll repeat the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name.
Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Almighty God, who in thy wisdom and goodness has appointed the office of rulers and parliaments for the welfare of society and the just government of men, we beseech thee to behold with thy abundant favor us thy servants, whom thou hast been pleased to call to the performance of important trust in these islands. Let thy blessing descend upon us here assembled, and grant that we may treat and consider all matters that shall come under our deliberation in so just and faithful a manner as to promote thy honor and glory, and to advance the peace, prosperity, and welfare of these islands and of those whose interests thou hast committed to our charge. And this we beg for Jesus Christ's sake. Amen. May the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the love of God and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all evermore. Amen.
Amen. We have a new member to be sworn in. Those responsible for bringing him forward, please bring him forward. You want to affirm or Bible? Yeah. We now welcome the honorable member, new member of Parliament, the Honorable Jason Haywood.
I do solemnly and sincerely affirm and declare that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, her heirs and successors according to law.
Mr. Hayward, I'm sure your stay here will be long, and I know you will have some fun, as we all do in Parliament. Welcome again.
Confirmation of minutes.
Are there any objections to confirming the minutes? Minutes of November the 15th? There appear to be none. Approved.
Messages from the governor.
There are no messages from the governor.
Announcements by the acting speaker.
Yes, those that are absent today are the Honorable Speaker, Mr. Lister, the Premier, David Burke, the Honorable Finance Minister, Mr. Dickerson, the Honorable Kim Wilson, Mr. Kim Swan, Mr. Selvin Richards, Leah Scott, and the Honorable Jamal Simmons.
Messages from the Senate.
There are no messages from the Senate.
Papers and other communications to the House.
There are none.
Statements by ministers.
The First Minister, Mr. Keynes.
If it pleases you, Acting Speaker. Mr. Acting Speaker, I rise this morning to provide this Honorable House and the public with an update on roadside sobriety checks. Mr. Acting Speaker, the Road Traffic Sobriety Checkpoint Amendment Act 2018 introduced measures that aim to curtail impaired driving, to create safer road conditions for motorists, and ultimately to save lives. The majority of people who die tragically in Bermuda die as a result of road traffic collisions. Mr. Acting Speaker, the roadside sobriety checks continues to be a resource-intensive activity for the Bermuda Police Service. Each checkpoint is manned by 8 to 14 officers, and there are sometimes more than one active checkpoint at a time. Since its launch in 2018, in September 2018, which during that time, only the Road Policing Unit, or the RPU, about 19 officers were trained.
Honorable Member, can I ask you to take your seat a minute? I forgot to bring in Mr. Kenner, because he should be able to have the opportunity to ask questions. Will you bring Mr. Kenner in, please? Sorry about that, sir.
Thank you for your indulgence, Deputy Speaker. Rise in the House this morning to apologize. I realize that
Minister, continue. You can start over.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker. Mr. Acting Speaker, the Roadside Sobriety Checkpoint Amendment Act 2018 introduced measures that, number one, aim to curtail impaired driving, and number two, create safer road conditions for motorists and ultimately save lives. The majority of people, Mr. Acting Speaker, who died tragically in Bermuda die as a result of road traffic collisions. Mr. Speaker, roadside sobriety checkpoints continue to be resource intensive for the Bermuda Police Service. Each checkpoint is manned by 8 to 14 officers, and there are sometimes more than one active checkpoint. Since the launch in mid-September 2018, which at a time only the road policing units, about 19 officers, were trained in using the handheld devices, to date I can confirm in this House that all operational uniform officers that are deployed from all 3 police stations are now fully trained. Mr. Speaker, sobriety checkpoint locations have included almost every parish. The checkpoints take place on public roads in locations where it is reasonable suspicion that incidents involving the consumption of alcohol may take place, and allow for the administration of breath tests to determine whether or not a motorist has been driving whilst intoxicated. All requests for roadside sobriety checkpoints are submitted to the senior magistrate and then are published in the Gazette 5 to 14 days before the date of the checkpoint. Mr. Speaker, during the period of January to October 2019, there have been 153 persons arrested as a result of driving under the suspicion of driving whilst under the suspicion of alcohol, or the influence of alcohol. The above arrests include motorists who refused to provide a sample of breath for examination. Those who did provide a specimen for examination include varying levels of alcohol consumption. The highest category are being 9 persons in the limit of 240 milligrams to 279 milligrams of alcohol in the range. 6 persons that were arrested for 280 milligrams of alcohol, and the highest level of alcohol in 80 milliliters of blood was 380 milligrams of alcohol. Please bear in mind, Mr. Speaker, that the legal limit is 80 milligrams. Mr. Speaker, in regards to the arrest by gender, ethnicity, and nationality, I'm able to provide the following information. Out of the 153 people arrested, 133 were male, 20 were female. Out of the 153 arrested, 110 of those people were black, and 25 were white, and the rest identified as other. The youngest arrested out of the 153 people was a 19-year-old, with the oldest person arrested out of the 153 persons was 71. However, the predominant age bracket of those arrested was from 30 to 50 years of age. 143 of the 153 people arrested were Bermudian, 1 British, and 9 were unknown. It should also be noted that 47 of the arrests came as a result of collisions and 156 without. This evidence that the proactive approach by the Bermuda Police Service to identify persons driving whilst intoxicated through drink is being effective. Mr. Speaker, I want to highlight that some of the road traffic collection data over the last 5 years with a notable positive reduction in fatal collisions, 50% reduction compared with the 3 years prior. It is considered that roadside sobriety testing has contributed to the reduction of both operational terms in arrest and regarding to public awareness and changes in culture towards the dangers of driving whilst under the influence of alcohol. Noting that there is a positive shift in the business that support many licensed premises offering free transport to patrons and greater use of taxis and help to the nighttime economy. Mr. Speaker, the total collisions in 2015, 1335, that increased in 2016 to 1,400, a decrease in 2017 to 1,249, 2018, 1,467, and in 2019, a drop to 1,117. Fatalities in 2015 were 7, fatalities in 2016 were 11, fatalities in 2017 were 15, fatalities in 2018 were 12, and fatalities in 2019 dropped to 6. Slight injury, Mr. Acting Speaker. In 2015, slight injuries were at 583. In 2016, 637, in 2018, 560, in 2018, 658, and in 2019, a drop to 596. Mr. Speaker, serious injury. In 2015, 496. Mr. Acting Speaker, in 2015, serious injuries, 101. Mr. Speaker, 2016, 84. 2017, 64. 2018, 92. And 2019, Mr. Speaker, 90. Damage only, Mr. Speaker, in 2015, 644. In 2016, 668. 2017, 610. 2018, Mr. Acting Speaker, 705, and a significant reduction, Mr. Acting Speaker, to damage only, reduced in 2019 to 525. Mr. Acting Speaker, the Bermuda Police Service will operate roadside sobriety testing throughout the festive period, beginning on December 6, 2019. Mr. Speaker, I have stated before that I am aware that these checkpoints may be considered intrusive and bothersome by some members of the public. But however, Mr. Speaker, in a country where one of the leading causes of premature death is road traffic collisions, these checkpoints are a necessary inconvenience. Mr. Speaker, I am reminded of the story believed to be written by Mr. Lawrence Isley, who was an American anthropologist, an educator, a philosopher, and a natural science writer, who taught in public books in the 1950s through the 1970s. Mr. Acting Speaker, the story has been adapted over the years, and it goes like this. One day, a man was walking along the beach, and he noticed a boy picking up something and gently throwing it into the ocean. Approaching the boy, he asked, "What are you doing?" The young man replied, "Throwing a starfish back into the ocean. The surf is up, and the tide is going out. If I don't throw them back into the ocean, it will die." "Son," the man said, "don't you realize there are miles and miles of beach and hundreds of starfish? You can't make a difference." After listening politely, the boy bent down, he picked up another starfish, and he threw it back into the surf. And smiling to the man, he said, "I made a difference for that one starfish." Mr. Speaker, I am hopeful that the continuance of the roadside sobriety checkpoints would lead to a shift in Bermuda's drink driving culture. If the roadside sobriety checkpoints initiative will just stop one person over the weekend from operating a vehicle whilst under the influence of alcohol, if the roadside sobriety checkpoints will prevent just one person from dying on our roads, I believe it is indeed worth the inconvenience, and we all have made a difference. Thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker.
Thank you. The next statements from Colonel Birch.
Good morning, Mr.
Morning.
Acting Speaker.
Yes.
I really enjoy when I can deliver good news, and 2 weeks ago I was able to do just that. Mr. Acting Speaker, recently I held a press conference on the most recent promotions within the Ministry of Public Works, and I'm happy to now also share that news with this House. As most of you know, I thrive on seeing Bermudians succeed, and I consider it to be a privilege to highlight some of our most recent appointments and promotions, in this case, 4 Bermudians trained to fill key roles within the Ministry of Public Works. The first person I wish to recognize is our new Chief Surveyor, Mr. Stephen Conway. Mr. Acting Speaker, the Chief Surveyor heads the Department of Public Lands and Buildings within the Ministry. Steve is a member of the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors and brings over 40 years' experience in the management of lands and buildings. He worked for the Bermuda Housing Corporation for 12 years and later served as property manager for the Bermuda National Trust. He joined the Ministry of Public Works 5 years ago as a senior state surveyor. Mr. Acting Speaker, Steve has acted in the position of Chief Surveyor on many occasions, consistently performing at a high standard, thus making the decision to appoint him to this substantive post an easy one. He succeeds another Bermudian, Mr. Chris Farrow, who has been promoted to Permanent Secretary and currently serves in the Ministry of Labour, Community Affairs and Sport. Mr. Acting Speaker, 3 years ago, on August 21st, 2016, a chief engineer was hired. His name is Yves Lorte, or Bob, as he is more commonly known. At the outset, Bob had a very clear, self-imposed mission to identify and train a Bermudian to succeed him before his departure. So with a mission like that, upon my arrival at the ministry, I declared him my favorite foreigner. Let me add, Mr. Acting Speaker, not only did he identify, train, mentor, and prepare his successor to fill the post, he did the same for many others throughout the department. Let me also state for the record that Bob was always crystal clear that he would have a qualified, able Bermudian ready to fill the post, and he would not stay one day past his 3-year contract. He was true to his word, handing over the reins on August 21st, 2019. Oh, to have that be the norm for all guest workers, Mr. Acting Speaker. Mr. Acting Speaker, his successor as Chief Engineer is Mr. Kirk Otterbridge, who holds a degree in mechanical engineering as well as a professional engineering designation. Kirk was the plant manager at Tynes Bay Waste-to-Energy Facility for the better part of the last 12 years and was quickly identified as Bob's successor. Since 2016, he has also been the Assistant Chief Engineer. Bob said after just a few weeks in Bermuda, it was obvious that Kirk had everything necessary to be the Chief Engineer. He stated that Kirk was a natural leader and technically very strong. As a Chief Engineer, you must be very open-minded and even more so very curious, and he stated that Kirk is both of these. Tynes Bay, which opened in 1993, could be at the end of its life expectancy, but due to Kirk's management, leadership, and the dynamic team there, it is maintained so well and continues to run efficiently. Mr. Acting Speaker, during his term at Tynes Bay, Kirk introduced a power engineering training program, created a solid waste contingency system for the island, and acted as the owner's representative project manager for the installation of a new turbine generator. And those are just a few of his achievements. So needless to say, Mr. Acting Speaker, he is the best choice for our new Chief Engineer. So now, having created a gap at Tynes Bay, Mr. Acting Speaker, Bob set about finding someone to fill that gap. He soon identified Mr. Nasir Wade to succeed Kirk as the new plant manager at Tynes Bay Waste-to-Energy Facility. Nasir has seamlessly taken over the management of the plant and stepped into the post left vacant by Kirk's promotion. Mr. Acting Speaker, Nasir, having obtained both a bachelor's and master's degrees in mechanical engineering from Howard University, following graduation accepted a position as project engineer with the United States federal government in their central heating and cooling power plant in Washington, D.C. He gained invaluable experience, skills, and training as a project engineer. In 2013, he returned to Bermuda to assume the role of maintenance engineer at Tynes Bay. Mr. Acting Speaker, in his 6 years at Tynes Bay, Nasir has successfully managed numerous capital works projects, decreased unplanned downtime, and initiated strategic required maintenance, resulting in less emergency repairs. At present, Nasir is managing the installation of a new preventative maintenance system which will transform and modernize the way in which the work at the plant is managed and increase and improve plant efficiency. Mr. Acting Speaker, he is a natural successor to Kirk at Tynes Bay. This now brings me to Bob's final Bermudian recruit, the new principal mechanical engineer at the quarry, Mr. Abayami. I'm going to get it one of these days. Abayomi. He can correct me anyway when I speak to him after this. Joined us in July this year, succeeding a guest worker who has returned to his native Wales. He was previously Vice President of Risk Management and Analysis for the Ascendant Group Limited. He holds a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering and a master's degree in business administration. His first mandate at the quarry is modernizing maintenance strategies for the 600 vehicles under our remit. He also has far more complex, long-term goals to modernize and upgrade the facility and staff. He follows in the footsteps of both his father and grandfather, Mr. Acting Speaker, who previously worked in the Ministry of Public Works. Mr. Acting Speaker, each one of these individuals are living examples of what can happen if we invest and believe in the capabilities of Bermudians. We can train them to fill all manner of posts, and yes, that also means that we may have to utilize the expertise of experienced expatriates to give them what they need to be, but always with the ultimate goal of providing opportunities for qualified Bermudians. And for that, Mr. Acting Speaker, I make no apology. Mr. Acting Speaker, I will continue to highlight these success stories for the very reason that in the Ministry of Public Works there are many more to come. A number of our star summer students are right now working towards degrees in engineering, project management, and architecture. So we will be showcasing stories of success for years to come. Mr. Acting Speaker, they join us in the gallery today so that we may all warmly congratulate them on their appointment to these new positions, wish them well in their careers, and encourage them to follow the example applied to them to help other Bermudians achieve their full potential too. Thank you very much, Mr. Acting Speaker.
On Mr. Stephen Conway, Mr. Kurt Otterbridge, Mr. Nasir Wade, and Mr. Ebioni Carmichael, on behalf of the Speaker of the House, Mr. Dennis Lister, and members of this House and Bermuda, we want to congratulate you on your appointments, and I know you'll serve this country well. And also like to thank the Minister, the Honorable Colonel Birch, as he endeavors to Bermudanize the Ministry of Public Works. Thank you. Ms. Fago.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good morning to the House and to our good people of Bermuda. Mr. Acting Speaker, I rise today to advise this honorable House about the recent block party that was held at the formerly named Engle Street Center. The event was held to celebrate two members of our community, Mr. Sammy Wilson and Mr. Clarence Hill, and to show our appreciation for the contributions of both of these gentlemen. Mr. Acting Speaker, the late Sammy Wilson was an avid sports enthusiastic tennis player and youth community activist during his time. He wanted only the best for children and individuals living in the surrounding Pembroke neighborhoods. Mr. Acting Speaker, he envisioned a place where the community could come together and thrive. So he created the center. Since its inception, it has become a place where seniors, community groups, budding entrepreneurs, and of course, our young people can all come together at a venue that is welcoming and supportive. Mr. Acting Speaker, it is only fitting to honor his memory by renaming the center to the Sammy Wilson Central Zone Community Center, and this was done with his family present on November 17, 2019. Mr. Acting Speaker, a sporting legend that is also associated with the center is Mr. Clarence Hill, who is well known for the success that he has had in the boxing arena, both locally and internationally. Mr. Hill has the distinction to date of being the only Bermudian in history to win a bronze medal at the Olympics. Exactly. He achieved this in the 1976 Games in Montreal, Canada. As an inductee into our Bermuda Sports Hall of Fame, without a doubt, Clarence Hill is considered one of our greatest athletes of any genre. Through his bronze medal win in 1976, Mr. Hill helped to put Bermuda on the map. Mr. Acting Speaker, Clarence first started training at the Pembroke Youth Center under Stanley Trim and then went on to pursue a prolific boxing career. It is only therefore fitting that on November 17th, we also recognize Mr. Hill's contributions to boxing, to sports, and his commitment to the development of young people with the naming of the Clarence Hill Multi-Purpose Gymnasium. Mr. Acting Speaker, in addition to the naming of the gymnasium, and on behalf of the Ministry of Labor, Community Affairs, and Sports, I also had the pleasure of presenting to Clarence a check for $10,000 in honor of his international achievements in boxing. That was long overdue, Mr. Acting Speaker. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Acting Speaker, with your indulgence.
Continue.
Thank you. While on my feet, I'd like to highlight a public consultation exercise that the Ministry of Labor, Community Affairs, and Sports is embarking on to address race relations in Bermuda, Mr. Acting Speaker. Bermuda's community is one that is vibrant, diverse, and steeped in history. Our ancestors hail from a wide variety of cultural backgrounds. In fact, Mr. Speaker, as the Honorable Premier noted during his official welcome of His Excellency, the President of the Regional Government of the Azores, Vasco Cordero, Bermuda's people are descendants of Africans and West Indians, Englishmen and Scotsmen, Pequots, Italians, and Azorians. We are truly a melding of traditions, ideologies, and human stories. Our collective histories are entwined against the backdrop of our cultural and racial diversity. Mr. Acting Speaker, we recognize that for generations, Bermuda's history has also been fraught with tensions and disagreements, particularly when it comes to the topics of race, diversity, inclusion, and equality. We also recognize that the issues of racial inequity and race relations can be difficult and complex discussions for us to have as a people. But I believe that as a community, we should have the courage, openness, and vulnerability to have these important conversations. Mr. Acting Speaker, I believe we have a unique opportunity to do so. So with that in mind, Mr. Acting Speaker, our ministry is taking the bold step of inviting honest and direct engagement from the community about how Bermuda can address and improve the relationships between the various sub-communities on our island. We need this community feedback in order to spark an informed and insightful dialogue that embraces our shared experiences. But most important, Mr. Acting Speaker, we want our community to share their thoughts and views on possible solutions on how we can better the connections between the races. Essentially, what we are seeking via public feedback is the following. Do you think that Bermuda's race relations have gotten better in the past 5 years? What do you believe we can do either individually or as a community that will improve race relations? What is the greatest stumbling block to us coming together as Bermudians? And with regards to the historical issues between the black and white communities, what does resolution look like? Mr. Acting Speaker, we are open to hearing all suggestions and approaches of how we can address this issue, whether it's more education about our collective history in our schools, whether it's reviewing inequitable policies or laws that have existed on our legislative books, or whether it's introducing or creating a cultural facility that showcases our racial and historical legacy. Mr. Acting Speaker, our government is committed to addressing our racial divisions, and to aid us in our mission, we have sought the involvement of a variety of community partners to hear about the significant works they have done on this matter. For example, we've had meetings with Citizens Uprooting Racism in Bermuda, known as CURB, to discuss their progress and to hear their feedback. And we have met with the Association of Bermuda International Companies, also known as ABIR, to discuss what the international business community can do to address the concerns regarding employment disparities. Sorry, thank you. I believe that we are at a stage where we can have an honest and thoughtful dialogue. We have seen the best of what we can accomplish when we come together as a community. An example of this over the Emancipation Day holiday and during our recent celebrations for the 170th anniversary of the arrival of the first Portuguese immigrants to Bermuda was a testament. Leading up to Cotmatch, Mr. Speaker, we celebrated the 185th year of the abolition of slavery in Bermuda and had a time for reflection. As part of our ministry's commitment to commemorate this historical milestone, the Department of Community and Cultural Affairs has hosted and supported a number of public events over the past several years which highlighted the resistance to slavery, such as the Conspiracy of 1761, the trial of Sally Bassett, and the poisoning conspiracies of the late 1720s. Mr. Acting Speaker, we have also tried to share with our community key educational information about our history before slavery, including research by Boston University professors Drs. Thornton and Hayward, indicating the Angolan roots of the original African Bermudian population, as well as the post-emancipation contributions of Black Bermudians, including the role of our friendly societies, the significance of Black entrepreneurship, and the 5-year Trail of Our People program that charted the contributions of unsung champions who supported the Black community through the post-abolition and segregation eras. Mr. Acting Speaker, there's a long and rich heritage that we have to draw from, and these are the stories that Bermudians need to know and claim as a way of bolstering a sense of national pride, identity, and purpose. As part of our ongoing cultural education efforts, Mr. Acting Speaker, the Department has also highlighted our national hero, Mary Prince, as her story is an integral part of our national narrative. This will include a statue in her honor in a public park that will provide a space to reflect not only the legacy of Mary Prince, but those that have carried the baton and made significant personal sacrifices to effect social change in our country. Mr. Acting Speaker, I referenced another observance which, in my view, helped to expand our historical understanding and bring our community together. We recently had a public holiday to recognize the 170th anniversary of the arrival of the first Portuguese immigrants in Bermuda. Mr. Acting Speaker, you and the honorable members of this House joined the government and members of our Portuguese community in participating in a number of events from November 2nd to 4th to celebrate this occasion. We are also very pleased to welcome the President of the Azores, His Excellency Vasco Cordero, and a delegation to Bermuda for the occasion. History tells us, Mr. Acting Speaker, that in 1849, Portuguese immigrants arrived in Bermuda's shores from Madeira, leaving behind their families and all that is familiar. For nearly 2 centuries, their vibrant customs, unique traditions, distinct language, and fascinating personal histories have been woven into Bermuda's story. Mr. Acting Speaker, I'm sure you will agree with me when I say that Portuguese residents and Bermudians of Portuguese descent have played a significant role in Bermuda's social, economic, political, and cultural advancement. So, Mr. Acting Speaker, I use these as examples, as we have a rich history to draw upon which indicate shared commonalities of our people regardless of race. And yes, Mr. Acting Speaker, whilst it's important to understand how we got here, it is also important to know where we are going and what we will do as individuals and as a community to advance race relations in Bermuda. My vision is for a just and equitable community that embraces diversity and supports all Bermudians. We are a small, proud, tightly knit community, and we can be an example to the world of how a country can find ways of addressing the issues born from a complicated and painful history in order to move forward together. Mr. Acting Speaker, how we move forward must come from our community, and we genuinely seek the public's idea on how we can improve race relations in Bermuda. With that in mind, Mr. Acting Speaker, I invite interested members of the public to visit our Citizens Forum online at forum.gov.bm and share thoughts as to how we can improve our racial connections in Bermuda. It is my intention to keep this moving forward, and I will come back to this House with those recommendations from the public that will help us to improve race relations in Bermuda and how we can assist with implementing them. On that note, Mr. Speaker, I will take my seat. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. There are 3 reports, all in the name of the Honorable Member, Pat Gordon-Pamplin.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker. Mr. Speaker, under the provisions of Standing Order 34.3 of the House of Assembly, I have the honor to attach and submit for the information of the Honorable House of Assembly the following reports. Public Accounts Committee report on the work and activities of the Public Accounts Committee over the period from June 2018 to November 2019. Public Accounts Committee report on breaches of financial instructions and corrective measures, and Public Accounts Committee report on the processes involved in handling the cases of public officers placed on administrative leave. Mr. Acting Speaker, with your indulgence, I would like to just highlight the content of the reports. I will do, with your permission, Mr. Speaker, the highlight on the report of the work of the accounts of the Public Accounts Committee. I would invite my fellow Public Accounts members, Susan Jackson, to do the brief overview on the report on the financial instructions and corrective measures. And I would invite the Honourable Member Renee Ming to do the overview on the report in terms of the processes involved in handling of the cases of officers placed on administrative leave. Mr. Acting Speaker, you will know that the Public Accounts Committee had occasion to go to Westminster and to Cardiff a year ago, January, and we had the opportunity at that point in time to be able to see Public Accounts Committees in practice, as well as to understand what some of the best practices were for Public Accounts Committees. When we returned to Bermuda, the second part of that engagement in going to Westminster and to Cardiff was that there would be an attachment, a clerk attachment, coming to Bermuda from the UK Parliament, and he was here in February of this year in the person of Stephen McGuinness, Dr. Stephen McGuinness. And we were able to sit with him for a 2-week period of time with intensive studies and learning and understanding. Subsequent to that, Mr. Acting Speaker, the clerk to the committee, the Auditor General, the Director of Internal Audit, and myself as chair of the PAC actually went on the invitation and the hosting by the UK OTP, the UK Overseas Territories Project. We went to Miami in order to be able to learn more about the best practices of Public Accounts Committees. One of the things that came out of that, Mr. Acting Speaker, was a confirmation that Public Accounts Committees are best and more effective when they take the opportunity to report to the House on a timely basis, on a topic-by-topic basis, as opposed to doing what we have historically done and waiting until the end of the year and producing one report for everything that we have done. So in keeping with that direction, it's an instruction that the Public Accounts Committee has taken on board, Mr. Acting Speaker. We have decided that we would do separate reports for the topics that we had under discussion, and it is in that vein that I'm asking your indulgence that other members of our committee are able to introduce those. The one thing that I'm trying to do as being chair of the Public Accounts Committee, Mr. Acting Speaker, is to ensure that all of our members within the committee are engaged and that each of those members will have an active part to play in reporting to this honorable House, as opposed to you having to sit and listen to my wonderful dulcet tones all the time. We will have the benefit of having members of our committee, other dulcet tones. We would have other members who would be giving the overview of the specific areas
That's kind of you.
under consideration. So the only thing I wanted to say by way of highlight, Mr. Speaker, is that we considered, apart from the clerk attachment, which we found to be tremendously valuable, we considered the issues of the handling of the cases of public officers placed on administrative leave, as well as breaches of financial instructions, and the breaches of financial instructions, which actually was a follow-on to work that had been done by a previous Public Accounts Committee, to make sure that as a committee we keep on top of those things that we highlight, make recommendations for, and that we make sure that things are continually kept up to date. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I would invite one of my honourable colleagues, the Honourable Member Renee Ming, if she would, to give the presentation for a few moments on the report in respect of the handling of public officers placed on administrative leave. Thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker.
The Honourable Member, Ms. Ming.
Good morning, Mr. Acting Speaker and Bermuda's listening audience. It is my privilege to be able to speak to the report of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on the Public Accounts for the processes involved in handling the cases of public officers placed on administrative leave. Mr. Acting Speaker, the committee under our chair, we took an exercise in looking at things that we wanted to either further investigate or just sort of see what the Public Accounts Committee could look at, because the role of, as explained by the chair, is that we look at things with a view of improvement and enhancement. Yes. And so this was one that we had, we took under our wing to have a look and see. And the committee undertook to investigate into the overall, we took to investigate the data on administrative leave covering the period from April 2016 until June 2018. And there was the processes involved in investigating and adjudicating the cases of public officers who allegedly committed some form of misconduct and have been placed on administrative leave. Part of the reason that this, we undertook to investigate this, Mr. Acting Speaker, is because the number or the amount of money of public funds that had been spent was one that triggered our, I guess it's our senses, I should say, because we went through and we had several cases of members from the civil service that were on leave, but there's the total amount of money for that period to the public purse. And if you allow me, I'm just going to refer to my notes so I can give you exact data. That total cost for that 15-month period was $568,339.94, and it was 19 cases. So that is the total cost, which is over $500,000 of officers being on administrative leave for that period. What we found particularly of interest was the fact that there were three particular cases that actually totaled over $300,000. So 55% of those funds were being used on three particular cases. And so we wanted to go in and we wanted to have a look and see what that was actually about. And that is where our investigation had taken us. So we had a series of 8 meetings, Mr. Acting Speaker. And we also had some of our witnesses that came before us were the head of the public service, the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Public Works, the former acting director of the Parks Department, the chairman of the Public Service Commission, and the secretary to the Public Service Commission / the director of Human Resources. And so it was through 8 meetings that we were able to interview and then also have discussion amongst our Public Accounts Committee. So as I said to you, Mr. Acting Speaker, 55% was being represented in 3 cases. So we undertook to investigate those 3 cases, and we looked at how we found ourselves in that space, and we also able to look at what the resolutions were at that time. Without going, because I think that these reports are important, Mr. Acting Speaker, and I encourage the public to read these reports, because I don't think reports are meant to sit on shelves. I believe they're meant to read them, to investigate them, and to also find ways to improve, and which is what we know will happen now because the report will be presented to the relevant ministry. But what we ended up finding out was that the leave that the officers were on for a period of time, it went through what the processes were in terms of the governmental processes, and then it finds itself at the Public Service Commission. And that is probably where we have some improvements at that stage. Because what ended up happening in 2017, and this is me giving a brief summary, is that these 3 cases of administrative leave were then overturned by the Public Services Commission. So I'm just made you aware that we spent over $500,000 and over $300,000 pertain to 3 particular cases, which were later overturned by the Public Service Commission. We did have an opportunity to interview the Public Service Commission members as well, and what I don't want to use the word alarming, but what was probably concerning to the committee was the fact that the Public Service Commission overturned, and the persons were their administrative leaves were overturned, but there's no reason given as to the why. And I don't want you to think that we think that is an issue with the overturning it, because we don't have the issue with it. But where we became concerned as a Public Accounts Committee is that without us giving a reason why, then we are bound to find ourselves down this road again, whether any administration and any government. And so why would we want to repeat something that may have been either bad behavior or maybe a misunderstanding or clearly could have been an error? And so that would be where the committee strongly made some recommendations on how that should look. In addition to that, because we're talking about the administrative leave, but while persons are on administrative leave, then the process in government is that someone acts up or is deputized or acts in that role. So there were additional funds of $24,000 that were paid to those persons who acted up in this role. So as you can see, Mr. Acting Speaker, we are talking about a large sum of money from the public purse. And as we know that money isn't easy to come by these days, and we are scrambling to find money for the various things. And so these funds right here, especially because the case was later overturned, we believe that we'd rather not see ourselves go down the path again for that. So further into the report, we speak to the interviews that we did, Mr. Acting Speaker, and then we give recommendations on what we found. And I'll just briefly read the recommendations, if you allow me. The recommendations, one thing we said, given the failure to receive meaningful information from the PSC, we came to the following. Number 1, the time taken for investigation and hearing by the senior management appeared to be too lengthy. And the reason for that was that since it's been determined that there were infractions of the Code of Conduct and that suspensions were appropriate, the next steps in the process should have been dispensed on a more timely basis. Timely dispensing of an issue will minimize the cost of leave and the cost of deputizing. So what the committee meant by that is that if something takes 15 months, then the persons who are on administrative leave are still paid over that time. And so a shorter time frame should be in place for maybe 1 month, 2 months, whatever. But we don't believe that we should be going for such lengthy periods of time when full pay is involved and act up salaries. And number 2, the process for appeals undertaken by the PSC should be fully documented and disseminated by the hubs. And I'm just going through them briefly now, Mr. Acting Speaker, for the expediency of time.
Yeah, it's a bit long, but speed it up.
But no problem. Thank you. I appreciate your leniency. The Public Service Commission failed to provide the committee with the adequate explanation of their processes. And then the importance of the work of the committee should be enforced and the full cooperation from the witnesses be expected. So those were basically the recommendations that came out of the committee. But like I said to you, Mr. Acting Speaker, the concern is the public purse. and the better use of funds. And so I think the committee has done well in not just identifying something that is a possible problem, but providing some solutions as well. Thank you, Mr. Acting
Thank
Speaker.
you. Ms. Jackson?
Good morning, Mr. Acting Speaker. So the Public Accounts Committee noted that quite a few of the Auditor General's recommendations included the fact that financial instructions needed or should be followed more closely. And so the Public Accounts Committee, not only the present but previous Public Accounts Committee, decided that they would follow up on this recommendation to make sure that the civil service was able to execute and be accountable for following the financial instructions. And out of that conversation, Mr. Acting Speaker, we realized that there is an infraction register that exists. So if somebody does breach the financial instructions, there is a register. Whether the breach of the financial instructions is a monetary loss or whether it's not, it allows us to keep track of those who are following the financial instructions and how to improve awareness and knowledge of one's duties when it comes to following those instructions. And so the Public Accounts Committee met with a few members from the Ministry of Finance, and we were able to discover that there is a register that is in place. It had not been particularly it wasn't being used on a regular basis at the time, and so the Public Accounts Committee decided that following on with the recommendation from the Auditor General, we would have regular reporting of infractions or breaches of financial instructions. And having done that, we were hoping that, one, the register would provide best practices in reporting of any breaches of financial instructions, that it would improve the reporting, that it would promote awareness of financial instruction requirements, and just enhance accountability. To date, we have had 2 or 3 sittings where the Ministry of Finance has sent in a representative to give a report and update on the register. The register appears to be actively collecting data of any breaches of financial instructions, and so the Public Accounts Committee is satisfied that this recommendation is now firmly in place and is being used. We did find a few things that I'd just like to mention. One is that the process of reporting a breach in financial instructions is self-reporting. So I just kind of want to take note of that fact, that employees have to acknowledge on their own whether there has been a breach. Also, there is now decentralized accounting, which means that there is a financial controller in each of the ministries that is making sure that there is oversight and scrutiny in each ministry. So it's not just one Ministry of Finance trying to have a view of all of the different ministries and any infractions or breaches. So the additional financial controller is certainly assisting in us finding any breaches. Now, the reporting of the breaches, that goes to the Accountant General's office. Once it gets to the Accountant General's office, the report of the breach is then recorded, and then subsequently the Cabinet Secretary is made aware, and if there is any disciplinary action, it's taken at that level. And then finally, we also found that there is training for financial instructions for staff in the civil service, and that this is, the key aim is to raise awareness and an understanding of the financial instructions, and that's administered by the Department of Human Resources. So with the reports that we have received, the PAC does have a few further recommendations that we would like to make. That is that we would like to continue receiving quarterly updates of the Register of Financial Instructions, of breaches of the financial instructions, that Quangos include their own financial instructions. So we have found in our investigations that some Quangos don't have any financial instructions, and they're not, I don't believe that they have to follow the government's financial instructions. So the recommendation is that quangos certainly write and have their own. That we continue the annual reporting, and that the other piece is that within this is a stretch, but within the personnel contracts for employment, that there is something that does state that there is a sort of binding obligation to follow financial instructions, and should that be breached, that there is the possibility of disciplinary action. And that we continue to improve compliance and reporting of the financial instruction breaches, and that we just investigate further whether self-reporting of infractions is effective, and whether there's any other way in which we may continue to keep this register of infractions robust. And with that, I'd like to thank not only our committee clerk, that's the Deputy Clerk to the Legislature, Mr. Clark Sumner, but also the Financial Secretary and the Accountant General for their regular reporting to the PAC. Thank you.
Thank you. We want to thank you, the committee, for the work that you do. It's certainly appreciated by all.
Okay. Question period.
Questions to the Premier has been deferred, and questions to the Honorable Colonel Birch has been deferred. There are questions for Minister Keynes by the Honorable Member Pat Gordon.
Excuse me, Mr. Speaker.
Yes.
I'm not sure what we need to do here, but this is probably the worst case of negligence I've seen to parliamentary questions in my time in the House. Since July, we haven't had answers to these questions. We're going into 5 months now.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order. Point of order, son. What's your point of order, sir?
The honourable member certainly misleading the House. He might not recall, but certainly I remember certain questions to the former member, Bob Richards, got deferred for about 6 weeks and running.
Continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I said, one of the worst cases, I said. There are others, I'm sure. But I'm not sure what recourse we have now. I believe I need to speak to yourself and the Speaker about how we can move this along.
I'd advise you to do that.
Thank you.
Okay. 1 second. Mr. Dunkley.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Just requesting indulgence from you and the Honourable Minister and the reasons for the deferment of the questions that I have put to the Honourable Minister Birch.
Ms. Pamplin.
I didn't hear him.
Is it Dunkley?
I didn't
What's that
hear
again?
Mr. Dunkley at all.
The Honourable Minister asked what was the question. The question was, I have asked through you to the Honourable Minister the reasons for the deferment of the questions that were due to be answered today.
Well, the leader of the opposition, he made the suggestion. We agreed that he needs.
I think he's.
We will take it up further later on the deferrals.
Mr. Speaker, to spare any confusion, I'm asking about the questions I asked to the Honourable Minister, who's on his feet, so perhaps he will get.
Yeah, but what questions are you talking about?
I'm asking, as I said, Mr. Speaker, the questions that I asked to the Honourable Minister of Public Works.
Yeah, what questions? You just cannot get up and say questions you asked. Everybody wants to know what questions are you talking about.
The questions that are on the order paper, I'm happy to read them if you would like, Mr.
No, they are deferred.
Yes, and I would ask the reason why they're deferred.
The answer that I gave to your leader stands for you also. They will be taken up in chambers. Because he asked the reason for the deferral, and we will take it up in chambers.
So you would like to speak to us in chambers when you have an opportunity?
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I look forward to that opportunity.
Okay. Ms. Gordon? Pamplin?
Thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker. Mr. Acting Speaker, my question to the honourable member, and with these not having pages, it's a little bit awkward, but with respect to the roadside sobriety testing, My question to the minister is, in light of the danger to which the minister spoke in terms of people driving while under the influence, is there a possibility that the minister can work with the Minister of Transport to do something about the brightness of some of the new LED lights according to new vehicles, that are on new vehicles? And the reason for that is if you've got somebody who's inebriated, then obviously it's going to create a further problem in terms of effective driving. And I just wondered if the two ministers can work together to give the
Point of order,
an
Mr. Speaker.
update.
What's your point of order, sir?
The honourable members going off from one thing to another. The question was on road sobriety, and she's just running off.
Minister,
making a statement.
I've accepted the question. Continue.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker. My purpose for trying to bring this together is in looking at roadside sobriety, we also want to look at some of the challenges that create further harm to the public while people are driving. If they are inebriated, there is a further challenge that one might have if they are not sufficiently alert to deal with oncoming headlights.
We got the
and
question.
that really is my challenge.
Yeah.
If the two ministers can work together to find some kind of
Yeah.
solution for the safety of the
Got it.
motoring public. Thank you.
And Minister, I've allowed this because it does have some connection. And if you can answer, fine. If you can't, then you can get the information.
Mr. Acting Speaker, the opportunity for us to look at driving patterns, driving behaviors, encumbrances on the road, that is something that it is an ongoing work in progress. The Road Safety Council, the chairman is present. Mr. Lister, MP Dennis Lister III is present today. He has the opportunity to hear the words of my colleague, the MP, and we were able to put together something for the not-too-distant future, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Okay, the next question, Ms. Gordon, you have one to Minister Fago on the Clarence Hill, Sammy Wilson statement.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker. My question to the Honourable Minister, and to say congratulations in naming that centre after Sammy Wilson, because I can think of no one more fitting and deserving. The Minister indicated in her statement was Angle Street Centre, but it actually was Pembroke Community Centre, and not an Angle Street Centre.
Yeah, what's the question?
So my question is, with the centre being named after Sammy Wilson and the gym being named after Clarence Hill, does that mean that the government has scrapped its intention to have a dedicated boxing centre, as they mentioned earlier on, in St. George's to honor Clarence Hill, and something that's named after him and not a centre within the overarching umbrella of under Sammy Wilson?
Minister?
The simple answer to that question, Mr. Acting Speaker, is yes.
Any further questions? Supplementary or another question?
Just a supplementary, just for clarity. We will not be having a Clarence Hill Centre in St. George's. Is that what the minister is saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying, yes.
Okay. Any further on that statement?
Yes,
Supplementary?
Mr. Speaker. Supplementary. There also was she mentioned the Honourable Member Minister and mentioned $10,000. Was there any kind of formula? How did we come up with that particular amount as to it being suffice as a reward?
Minister?
I think members will recall that in the past, Ms. Duffy and Nikki Saunders were given an award of $10,000 as being medal winners, but Clarence was also given $10,000 because he is the only Olympic medal winner, and so he was given the same amount. And the amounts that are allocated for medal winners are $10,000, I think $8,000 and $7,000. Yeah.
Second supplementary?
Second supplementary. Yeah, if I were to take to conclusion the Honourable Minister's answer there, I would have thought that it probably, using that formula, would have come out to be more. An Olympic medal certainly outweighs any other public sporting event
What's the
in the
question?
world.
What's the question?
The question then is, with the formula that she's using, would she have considered that the amount should have been more as opposed to the same?
Minister?
I will say this, that Mr. Clarence Hill was a bronze medal winner. Gold medal winners normally get $10,000, but because he is an Olympian, we gave him $10,000. Yeah.
The next questions from Mr. Canier to Minister Fogo on race relations. Mr. Canier, you better pay attention here. Your question is to Ms. Fogo on race relations.
Yes. My apologies. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm trying to get used to flipping back and forth. Let me just go to the
Statement.
Yeah. The Honorable Minister mentioned that questions would be asked in the statement, and that at the end of the paragraph she says that she would come back with those recommendations. I was just wondering, it's a bit vague as to a format. We've seen some of these forms already in place in the past. Hoping that she might be able to put a little more meat onto the form that she is actually using once she gets the questions in. Who is going to be sitting down, going through what they feel is relevant, irrelevant, and then the format that coming back to the House and recommendations, that she's going to make recommendations that the country is going to move forward with this. It was a bit vague, and I was wondering if she could expound on that.
Minister?
These are the initial stages, and what we're doing first is a consultative part, and it's on a line for the public to interact with, because we want to first hear from the public. That will help shape what we do next.
Any further questions to the minister on that segment? Okay, that brings the close to the question period.
1 minute. Congratulatory and/or obituary speeches.
The acting speaker recognizes the Honorable Colonel Birch.
Mr. Acting Speaker, good morning. I want to send condolences to two great stalwarts of Somerset who passed recently. One of them is being funeralized today, Mr. Acting Speaker. Both of whom had a hand in the rod of correction with me. The first being Mrs. Veronica Louise Sega Ross, who was a teacher and deputy principal at Sand Secondary School. And in reading her obituary, Mr. Speaker, it's probably the best example of the English language where they didn't say that she was a strong disciplinarian. No, they said she was a strong disciplinarian, but in the nicest sort of way. And my experience was that she was really, that discipline was really dispensed in a nice way. But what I will say, Mr. Acting Speaker, is I certainly never forgot her. And as an adult, I certainly appreciated the instruction and correction that she frequently dispensed to me. The second one, Mr. Speaker, is Mr. Quentin Eugene Talbot, who is being funeralized today. He didn't participate in my correction, but his wife certainly did, Mr. Speaker. He and his wife were lifelong friends of my parents, and we lived across the lane on Cricket Lane in Somerset. And so, you know, even though I didn't appreciate it then, I certainly appreciate it more today, that parents in those days had rite of passage to dispense discipline to all the children in the village. Oh, Lord, to hearken back to those days today. Y'all got parents around here today who can't even hearken discipline to their own children, let alone anybody else. In any case, Mr. Speaker, let me get back on track. I do want to extend condolences to his widow, Marjorie Talbot. I'm going to be absent a little bit when we return this afternoon because I'm going to make the pilgrimage to Somerset for the funeral at 1 o'clock, so I'll come back as soon as I can, Mr. Acting Speaker. But I fondly now these days remember that she had no problem dispensing discipline to me and my 5 siblings and her 5 children and anybody else in the neighborhood who require discipline. And certainly, you always you look back on that more favorably than you did when you experienced it. I'll say that much, Mr. Speaker. I suspect there's some in this country that said it had no effect at all based on my behavior someday, these days. But in any case, Mr. Acting, that's true. The jury's still out, Mr. Acting Speaker. But I have flashes in the pan of, remembering those instructions. In any case, Mr. Acting Speaker, I would ask that condolences be sent to both families of Mrs. Ross and Mr. Talbot. Thank you very much.
The chair recognizes the honourable member Dennis Lister III. You have the floor.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, and to the rest of the House and to the listening audience. I would also like to associate my condolences with those mentioned by Colonel Birch from Ms. Ross, who, growing up in the Somerset community, I had the privilege of also being watched by her at times. Her family and my family were very good friends, so I grew up as one of her children going through Vacation Bible School at times. And also to Mr. Talbot, a stalwart of the Somerset community. Mr. Acting Speaker, I'd like to send a number of congratulations. Firstly, to young Mr. Kenny LeJour, who won the Faldo Series International Junior Golf Tournament under 16 boys division. So, and I'd like to associate the Minister Fogo also. Also, we've had last week and since we last sat in this House, a number of competition winners locally. We had the Rocket Pitch Entrepreneur competition that happened earlier this week, I believe, and there were a number of winners, so I'd like to send congratulations to all of those winners. Also, and I must declare my interest here, the winner of the Ignite Final Pitch competition, who happened to be my fiancée, I'd like to send congratulations also to her. And last but not least, to the Bermuda College. Last week, the Bermuda College, their journal, the BC Journal Voices in Education, was invited to be included in the University of Florida's Digital Library of the Caribbean. And just a quote here from the news article, if I can read it, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The achievement was made all the more gratifying because the university cited the journal's quality and academic contributions as a factor in its decision to include the scholarly publication. So this is what the University of Florida said about the Bermuda College's journal, Voices in Education. So again, congratulations to the Bermuda College for their journal being recognized and being added to this digital library. Thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker.
Any further speakers? The chair recognizes the honourable member, Mr. Terrell. Mr. Terrell, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Good morning, all. Mr. Speaker, Deputy Speaker, we all know that there are many long-serving and dedicated teachers in this country, but I would certainly like to send congratulations out to a neighbor of mine, Jameer Simons, for her 30 years in education. I'd like to associate the deputy and our whip and MP Ming, MP Levita Fogo, and Lister to that. Mr. Speaker, I'd also ask that congratulations could be sent out to another dedicated community worker, Mr. Tariq being Darrell. In fact, Mr. Darrell and Ms. Jameer Simons are both instrumental in me standing here right now, so I certainly like congratulations to be sent to them. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I would be very remiss if I did not mention this young lady who made the principal honors list at the Barclay, I understand. She's an S1 student, and her name is Ms. Cameron Terrell. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
The chair recognizes the acting leader, Mr. Walter Robon.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker. I would just like to certainly be associated with all the congratulatory remarks already given by members, but I would like to unfortunately bring a condolence request to the House for the family of Edith Mildred Desmore Richardson, the widow of the late Hugh Richardson, who was also a president of the Senate. You, myself, and I believe Minister Diallo attended the funeral service yesterday at St. Paul's AME, and I will respond to the request to be associated.
Entire house. We want to associate the entire house.
I will take your guidance and associate the entire House with this condolence. Ms. Richardson was the wife of certainly an outstanding member of this community who has the honor of being one of the founding members of the Progressive Labor Party, but also a member of the legislature in the highest position in the other place. So it is important that we give recognition to that, but we must also remember, which I'm sure this is less a message to the members of this House, but to the community. When members serve in the capacity of public service as members of both chambers do, often their whole family serves with them and give time and energy and sacrifice to the work that is done. Ms. Edith Mildred Richardson did the same for her husband and her family, and her homegoing service had outstanding representation not only from the Richardson clan, but also from the Manders clan and other family members who remember her fondly and proudly and acknowledge her service to the country along with her husband. They were a team, and that was reflected in the words shared at the service. So this House can certainly pass encouraging remarks to her family for her passing. Thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker.
Thank you. Let me apologize. The President of the Senate has been here since we started, and I didn't recognize him. My apologies. You're always welcome, President. Madam, that's Joan Dillis Wright, President of the Senate. The Chair recognizes the Honorable Minister Levita Fogo.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker. I would like to be associated with the condolences for Mr. Talbot and the Talbot family. And, Mr. Speaker, I also want to be associated with the congratulatory remark for the rocket pitch competition. I had the privilege of being a judge at that competition, and my ministry, the Ministry of Labor, Community Affairs, and Sports, sponsored that, particularly the youth division. And what was so pleasing about that is that the young man who was the winner of the youth division is an autistic young man, and he produces a cookie that already businesses in Bermuda have him making cookies for. But on top of that, I'd like to associate MP Weeks with these remarks. But on top of that, what he has pledged to do is to ensure that through his business going forward, that he will make certain that other autistic individuals will secure employment as he grows his business. The statistics show that 85% of autistic college graduates never become employed. And with that in mind, he has made that pledge, because one of the questions going to him was particularly on that. How will you not only raise awareness, but also assist other autistic individuals? And he has said through his business, he wants to make certain that those individuals secure employment. So that was young Mr. Peets. He's about 15 years old, and he won that division. Thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker.
Thank you, Minister Fogo. Any further speakers? There appear to be none.
Next is matters of privilege.
There are none.
Personal explanation.
There are none.
Notice of motion for the adjournment of the House on matters of urgent public importance.
There are none.
Introduction of bills.
The Acting Speaker recognizes the Honorable Minister Dwayne Furbert. You have 5 bills, Mr. Furbert?
Yes, I do.
You can continue.
Yeah. Good morning, Mr. Acting Speaker. I'm introducing the following bills for their first reading so that it may be placed on the order paper for the next day of meeting. Bermuda Monetary Authority Amendment Act 2019. Economic Substance Amendment Number 2, Act 2019. Government Authorities Act 2019, Insurance Number 2 Amendment Act 2019, and Investment Funds Amendment Number 2 Act 2019.
We have one in the name of the Honorable Member Neville Tyrrell. You have the floor, Mr. Tyrrell.
Good morning again, Mr. Speaker. I am introducing the following bill for its first reading so that it may be placed on the order paper for the next day of meeting. Criminal Injuries Compensation Amendment Act 2019. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. The acting speaker recognizes the Honorable Sain De Silva.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am introducing the following bills for their first reading so that they may be placed on the order paper for the next day of meeting. The Super Yachts and Other Vessels Miscellaneous Amendment Act 2019 and the West End Development Corporation Traffic Officers Amendment Act 2019.
Thank you, Honorable Minister De Silva.
Opposition bills, private members' bills, notice of motions, orders of the day.
The first order of the day is in the name of Minister Ferbert. Have I got it right?
Thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move that the bill entitled the National Pension Scheme, Occupational Pensions Temporary Amendment Act 2019 be now read the second time.
Continue.
Mr.
Oh, excuse me. Did you withdraw the bill?
Oh, is that,
Which one is that? Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, yes.
was it before or after?
Yeah, withdraw number 2.
Yes, thank you, sorry.
You have your motion?
Yep.
Withdrawing number 2, order number 2.
Yeah, I sent her email. She should know. Mr. Speaker, on the provisions of Standing Order 48, I move to withdraw the bill entitled Investment Fund Amendment Act 2019 that was tabled. Withdraw the bill entitled Investment Funds Amendment Act that was tabled September 27, 2019.
Any objections? Continue. Withdrawn. So you go to order number 3, second reading.
So, Mr. Speaker, as we start to debate the National Pension Scheme of Occupational Pensions, Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to provide for the consideration of this Honorable House the bill entitled National Pension Scheme Occupational Pensions Temporary Amendment Bill 2019. The purpose of the bill is to allow for the voluntary suspension of 2% of employee and employer contributions for a 2-year period. Mr. Speaker, honorable members will recall that on November 15th, the Minister of Finance passed in this House the bill entitled the National Pension Scheme Occupational Pensions Amendment Act 2019. This bill provided for a number of significant policy and regulatory objectives, and the most significant amendments were as follows. Required non-member means to participate in registered plans, provided for additional financial hardship withdrawals for funeral expenses, permitted retirees to apply for financial hardships withdrawals and to be exempted from having to pay the application fee, permitted plan members or former members to receive the entire value of their pension fund account balances for defined contribution plans or committed value for defined benefit plans at retirement if $50,000 or below. Provided for the ability of plan members at retirement to receive up to 25% of the value of their pension fund account balances for defined contribution plans or community value for defined benefit plans as prescribed in regulations. Introduce regulatory fees payable by plan administrators. Change the 2-year vesting contribution to 1 year. Provided for the Minister of Finance to introduce regulations to control the fees charged to plan members. Introduce monetary penalties for non-compliance by plan administrators or other related persons. Provided for certain exemptions for multi-employer plans. Included all bonuses in recalculating the amount of pension contributions. Required employers to maintain specified payroll and employee-related information and fail to do so is an offense. Introduce a payment of interest by employers on their late pension contributions. In order to introduce plan expenses for smaller plans, increase the requirement for audited financial statements for plans from 1 million to 3 million, and finally introduce greater oversight of plan trustees and their specified fit and proper standards. Following the passage of this bill, the Minister of Finance announced that the government and recognized that some employers are under increasing financial hardship, and employers are facing increasing cost of doing businesses. Therefore, it was proposed to provide for employer and employees currently participating in plans under the Act to voluntarily, and I repeat, voluntarily suspend 2% of their required pension contribution into the National Pension Scheme plan for a period of 2 years. Mr. Speaker, by providing such a relief for employees and employers, participating employees will see their take-home pay increase by 2%, and participating employers will also benefit from reduced operational expenses, 2% over payroll. Mr. Speaker, ensuring adequate, secure, and sustainable pension provisions for our population is an important feature of this administration manifesto. And this temporary action should in no way question the government's commitment to this mandate. Mr. Acting Speaker, it is important to sustain jobs as our economy is recovering. There was a time not so long ago when companies did not have to provide pensions to employees. Now they do. However, we must recognize that employers are under pressure, and as our economy is recovering, we must reduce pressures on companies. This is temporary measures that will provide temporary relief to employers and provide additional income to employees. Additional income to employees provides stimulus for our economy, or could provide stimulus to our economy. Stimulus lead to growth and create jobs, and that is what our economy needs. This is voluntary, and employers can still contribute to their funds if they wish. This mandate will also complement our financial hardship provisions introduced by the government to assist needy employees in managing their financial affairs. Mr. Speaker, if the suspension of contributions taken up across the private sector, it will provide both relief and stimulus to families and businesses. The stimulus to the economy will be generated if some of the saving is converted to consumer spending in the local economy and business investing in infrastructure and improvements. During the debate, the Minister of Finance provided stats that were provided by the Pension Commission. For the sake of good order and just to show how much funds are under investments in the various plans, I provide this information as at December 31st, 2018. The statistics are as follows. 25,386 estimated plan members. Number of plans, 3,065, which comprise of 3,050 defined contribution and 15 defined benefit. Approximately $2.98 billion of assets in plans, 568 self-employed plans, 6 approved third-party plan administrators, 785 million of assets in local prescribed retirement products, $28.79 million in total financial hardship payments since inception in 2010. That's payments that have been made out. Mr. Speaker, pensions provided under the National Pension Scheme, Occupational Pensions Act 1998, represents the second pillar of Bermuda's pension arrangements, with the first pillar being the basic pension received from our social insurance scheme, our contributory pension fund. It is important to note that Bermuda is one of the few jurisdictions in which the provision of occupational pension plans is mandatory. And compared to most developed countries, the provision of pension plans by the private sector is very highly, as nearly all Bermudians and their spouses who are employed have a private sector pension plan. The scope has been expanded further with the amendments of November 15th, which require a segment of non-Bermudians to participate in registered plans. Mr. Speaker, the bill brought forward today provides for employers and employees currently participating in the plan under the Act to voluntarily suspend 2% of their required pension into their National Pension Scheme plan for the period for 2 years. This opportunity to suspend pension contributions is also extended to self-employed persons under the same conditions. Participation is voluntary. However, as a matter of policy, if a union agreement exists that speaks to agreed pension plan contributions, the relevant union agreement is also required. Mr. Speaker, a member must give notice of his decision to suspend contributions, and the employer must notify the administrator of any proposed suspension of contributions. It's also important to note that members and employees who wish to continue making contributions throughout the 2-year term may continue to do so. Another participatory condition is that eligibility and pension plan membership will be continued during the suspension period, even if contributions are suspended. Mr. Speaker, to participate in the suspension businesses must be updated with their contributions. In other words, you cannot participate unless you're updating. And is to avoid compounding any existing non-compliance with the Act. Mr. Speaker, this proposal is sensible and intends to ease financial burdens on employers and employees as our economy is still recovering. If taken up, it can also stimulate the labor market by providing payroll savings, which could be utilized to retaining employees or making other meaningful business investments or expenditures. Thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker. Welcome other participation from other members. Thank you.
Any further speakers? The acting speaker recognizes the honourable member, Pat Gordon-Pamplin. Ms. Pamplin, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker. Mr. Acting Speaker, this bill disturbs me. And I say it disturbs me for one reason. The minister, in his presentation, in his opening remarks, indicated that there are not many countries that have a mandatory contribution to an occupational pension. But Bermuda has done that. And it has done that because it was seen way back when, in eons ago, that in the absence of having a mandatory savings plan, because that effectively is what it is, then people can find themselves reaching the age of retirement and there's nothing to help to bolster them. So it's a forced saving while you are working so that when you retire, there is something in the pot for you to fall back on. The absence of that was creating a challenge in which people who had no money in the savings found themselves either unable to meet basic needs or having to rely on the government financial assistance if they didn't have what they required in order to survive. So while it might have been unpopular at the time to force people to save for their retirement, I believe in retrospect we are able to determine that that was in fact a good thing. Because now when people retire, there is something on which, apart from the government social insurance pension scheme, in which, well, I call it a pension scheme, but the social insurance scheme that people can get their maybe $1,000, $1,200, whatever the amount is, that there has been something set aside for them from their money that had they had it all at the time, they might have been inclined to spend more than they, or spend as much as they had, and therefore there would have been nothing set aside. I can declare an interest in as much as I am a retiree. And I can tell you that having a forced pension savings on which, notwithstanding I don't like the amount of restrictions, because you will know, Mr. Acting Speaker, that when you retire, the money that is saved in your occupational pension, they determine what the balance is at the 31st of December of any given year. And after the age of 65, you are entitled, prior to whatever amendment was made last week and ignoring that, but you are entitled to take out 7% of the balance of your funds that you've worked for. Now, you've put aside this money, and you could get 7% of it during the course of the next 12 months. The idea being that the other 93% would remain within the pension funds management, and they would then hopefully build up and maybe not necessarily replenish the 7% that you've taken out, but certainly help to ameliorate the amount that would now be made available going forward. So I understand the concept. But here's the kicker, Mr. Acting Speaker, is that when you get to that ripe old age of 65 or 66, let's say that you take your 7% out, and let's say you drop dead. So you've got 93% of your money that has been taken out of your salary for your entire working period from the time that, that these pensions came into being. And what happens to that 93%? Your beneficiaries, Mr. Acting Speaker, have the benefit of getting 100% of that balance that's left in the fund. So if I take out 7% of my money and I drop dead, my children can come and take the rest of it, all paid to them in one lump sum, when I'm the one who worked for it. Now, something is wrong with that picture. So I think the idea of saying that at the very least, 25% could be taken out of the fund, at least it kind of makes the pill a little bit easier to swallow. Because you don't want to say you're going to leave your money to the neighborhood cat or to the church, because one would assume that your children are not so worthless that you don't want to look out for them, Mr. Acting Speaker. But the idea that they get to have it all, and you who worked for it get to have it only in little bits and pieces, I've always thought that something was wrong with that picture.
You could put it on a check and take it with you.
Well, I think that that's a possibility, but, you know, as I say, I want all of mine as much as I can get. Give it to me now and let me put it under my mattress if that is what I so choose.
Put it in the casket.
However, when we are now saying to people that, okay, you can suspend this, so notwithstanding, and I wanted to put that out front, what I feel about the way the process works. However, when you are saying it's okay to suspend up to 2%, both for the contribution of the employee and the contribution of the employer, I believe that the preconditions are correct. You have to make sure that they are not trying to say, I'm not going to pay in the 2% on your behalf, and I'm already behind on your contributions. That clearly is not right, because there has to be some incentive to ensure that people are up to date with their pension contributions. So I have no issue with that. But to say that we now need this extra money in the pockets and the hands of employers and employees because times are tough, to my mind, is a tacit admission that the policies of this government are failing. It's saying that people don't have enough money, and now you can keep back this 2%. And you know, for the employer as well as the employee. The employer now has more money to run his business. The employee has more money to spend in the grocery store and wherever else. And that 2% could be significant to some people. But I can tell you that if we start looking at the overall expenditure and how we are taxing our people to death, that 2% that they are now relinquishing, even though it's only for a period of 2 years, could be significant to them in the final analysis. Because when you're looking at saying, I've got this 2% extra money in my pocket, that's 2% extra for now. But how much are you, what is the opportunity cost of the 2%? By not putting that 2% into the pot, you are failing to have that money accumulating. You do not have the benefit of the markets or however those pension funds are managed. You don't have the benefit of increasing that 2%. So while it may seem like it's only a 2% retention, it certainly can grow, which is the idea of having a pension fund, is for it to grow over time so that that 2%, that $20 contribution over time, over the 2 years, that's going to be $40 that you don't put in, that $40 over time can grow. And by the time you get between the time that you've withheld it and the time that you retire, that $40 could grow to $100. So you are effectively being short-sighted in saying you don't have to put in now, but realizing it's important for people to understand if you don't put in now, you may be saving it today, but you're going to pay in the long run. Excuse me. I believe that that is the key. I think it's important for people to understand that having that extra little bit of money today could negatively impact them in the long run. And if I get no other message across, Mr. Acting Speaker, it is that when you start thinking in terms of what we're paying extra for the groceries, in sugar tax, and everything else, that it seems to be impacting almost everything in the grocery stores, the cost of living is prohibitive. It's growing exponentially under this government's policies. You've seen an increase in land tax, so people have less money, so they now need to be able to pay the land tax extra, so that now they can take the 2% out of their pension money to pay the land tax. They're saving the 2% today to pay the extra dog license. They're taking the 2% out now to pay all of these extra taxes that the government has inflicted upon the electorate, upon the constituencies. And now they're saying, okay, I need to have this money, this extra money in my pocket. And the government is saying, people, we have failed you. We're allowing you to keep the extra money. Businesses, we are failing you. So we're allowing you to keep the extra money. And let's hopefully not be throwing caution to the wind. Hopefully at some point in time, over a 2-year period of time, we'll be able to make it up. But you will never be able to make up unless you double up and triple up going forward the amount that you do put into that fund so that it can start to grow and have some meaningful impact. So by the time you get to those 10 or 12 or 15 years of failure to contribute, that the negative impact of that failure is not going to hurt you significantly when you get to retirement. I've seen it in operation. I have seen people retire. And I've seen people retire who did not have that money to put in. I've seen people who have come onto a retirement plan only recently, as the government determined in the 1990s, I believe it was, that it was a prerequisite, that it was mandatory. And I've seen people reach a stage of retirement in which they have a good lump sum of money that's been set aside that would not have been there but for that mandatory requirement. I've also seen people who, having not made the contributions, find themselves at the age of 65 still having to slog away to say, I have nothing to fall back on. And we want to minimize the temptation for people to say, I'm going to be able to save this 2%. Because while it may not seem like a significant amount, Mr. Speaker, what we're looking at is the opportunity cost of that 2%. I believe the government needs to be a lot more mindful, not so much in saying how they are going to alleviate the business pressures for people operating on a daily basis, or for people not being able to go and buy the things that they would normally buy out of this money. Therefore, they need the 2% to make up the difference. What the government should be looking at, Mr. Acting Speaker, is how can their policies now start to make life easier for people? How can we save money? How can we not have people who are, excuse me, you have a full complement of ministers of the government, but then we pay somebody else to act up in the capacity as government minister? That's taking money out of the public purse. How can we be really effective in curtailing expenditure of the government so that the pressure that we put on the electorate, the pressure that we put on people who are out there earning, isn't so stringent that they aren't being choked under these pressures? They don't feel like they've got that the government has a throttle hold on them, Mr. Acting Speaker. That is where the challenge is. So while the 2% and 2% by employer and employee may work for today and tomorrow, look at the opportunity costs that people are giving up, and look at the impact on them for the money that they won't have in that fund today that will not be able to increase by proper and prudent investments over time, so that when they get to retirement, there's something meaningful for them to fall back on. It's a dangerous precedent. I realize it's only a period of 2 years. It is a dangerous precedent. It's almost like what we saw during budget time, Mr. Acting Speaker, when we said, we're not going to put money into the sinking fund. We're not going to make this saving. And while I understood the minister's reason for it by saying that if we're working at a deficit, we don't want to find ourselves in a situation where we are effectively paying interest to put money in savings. But there's a slightly different context here. What you're saying to people is, spend your money now, spend your extra 4%, the 2% for the employer, the 2% for the employee, spend it now, don't have it to set aside, and when you're going to be most desperately in need of it, it's not going to be there. And I'm not trying to be the purveyor of doom and gloom. However, the reality is we want to ensure that people understand what it is that they are doing. It's okay to look at immediate gratification, instant gratification. Got some extra money now, but how is it going to impact you moving forward? Thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker.
Thank you. Any further speakers? The acting speaker recognizes the honourable member, Mr. Tyrrell. You have the floor, Mr. Tyrrell.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the speaker just before me did use the words that I was going to use. I would probably describe her as the honourable member of doom and gloom, because that's exactly what she's preaching right now on this. But we're going to talk about the bill itself. Contrary to her, the honourable member's remarks, I'm not so disturbed about the changes that the minister is suggesting for this, or making amendments for the national pension scheme. I certainly support the amendment because it has a purpose. The minister is looking at a stimulus exercise, and it is going to be a stimulus for the member themselves and businesses. This vacation of deductions of 2%. One of the things that I will encourage, though, because that's probably, well, two things I probably agreed with the honourable member of doom and gloom is that I too wish that there was some other method of the final payment of pensions, but that's another story for another day. But I certainly would encourage members to look at it, the plan members to look at it this way. Yes, it's voluntary that they can take advantage of this amendment, but let me make the suggestion that members of the plan also have the opportunity to make voluntary contributions. So let me then put it this way. If you decide that maybe I don't want 2% taken out over 2 years, why don't I just put aside maybe $50, $60 a week in voluntary contributions, because that will add up and help over that 2-year absence of the 2%. So there's different ways of looking at it Mr. Deputy Speaker. There are times when people do need, they're in distress, and if they're in financial distress, then this is an opportunity. But there's another method of looking at it. So I support the amendment. I have no problem with it. I would only counsel plan members to look at it to see what benefits them. Make voluntary contributions to your pension plan. Mr. Speaker, this government really hasn't failed its people with its policies. It's just a view from the members on the other side who preach this doom and gloom. And I would caution the listening audience to take it with a grain of salt. That's the way I would look at it, Mr. Speaker. And as I said, I support the amendment, and I support the minister, what he's doing.
Any further speakers? The chair recognizes the Honorable Scott Pearman. You have the floor, Mr. Pearman.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker. I have 3 quick points to make.
Yes, sir.
The first is to echo my honorable colleague, Patricia Gordon-Pamplin's sentiments that the very fact that this bill is being discussed and debated is an indication of Bermuda's failing economy. And I say that given the last speaker, who I'm afraid has just left the chamber. But I respectfully disagree with his observation. If he doesn't realize that Bermuda has a failing economy, someone better call an ambulance for him. My second point, Mr. Acting Speaker, is this. It's a question for the minister. The minister and I like to discuss numbers sometimes, and I think it helps. And I just want to make sure I've understood it. And I'll use simple numbers and simple percentages so that we don't get confused and so that the listening audience can be assisted. And that is this. Let us say that your average Bermudian pays $1,000 a year into a pension fund. Those contributions, as we know, are made by the employer and by the employee. And this might not be the correct percentages, but let's just say that those contributions from the employer and the employee, let's just say they're equal. So it's $500 a year from the employer, and it's $500 a year from the employee. Simple numbers. $1,000 a year, $500 from employer, $500 from employee. If I've understood this bill, this 2% means that this pension holiday is a savings on those numbers of $10 a year for the employer and $10 a year for the employee. And I'd invite the Honorable Minister to confirm that I've correctly understood the maths. I see someone nodding or shaking his head, so perhaps I haven't. But that's how I calculate 2% of $1,000 a year. And I think $1,000 a year into a pension is probably consistent with many Bermudians. Mr. Acting Speaker, my third point and final point is a matter I touched on 2 weeks ago. And it was in relation to the previous pension bill that came through. And I just want to say this, because I think it's important to remind ourselves, we get into these debates about pensions and changes. Why do we have a pension? A pension is a safety net. It is a fund for a rainy day. And the risk, Mr. Acting Speaker, is that if we encourage people, either by the previous bill with early drawdown, or by this bill with a pension suspension, pension holiday, we've got to make sure that if they spend it now, what are they going to do in that rainy day? Where is the plan for that rainy day? And I'm repeating what I said last time, Mr. Acting Speaker, but I think, and someone's shouting from the other side, it's a personal choice. I don't doubt it's a personal choice, but we as a government have a responsibility to make sure that people are taken care of. And sometimes people have no choice but to do something in the now and the here. And when they do, that will have repercussions. That will cause problems in the then, in the there. And so it is just important to consider what we're going to do for those people in the then and in the there if they don't save their rainy day money now. And I would have liked to think that that third point is a point upon which all in the House could agree, and hopefully we'll see some government policies on that basis. Thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker.
Any further speakers? The chair recognizes the Honourable Member Michael Dunkley. You have the floor, Mr. Dunkley.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker. Mr. Acting Speaker, I'm quite surprised that government members aren't jumping up in droves to speak on this item today, because this is critical to where we stand in Bermuda today in November of 2019. And I fully echo the comments by my honorable colleagues who spoke before me, and Patricia Gordon-Pamplin and MP Scott Pearman, in the fact that the honorable member interpolates from across the floor, but I look forward to him standing up after, Mr. Speaker, because he's got a lot to say from his seat, but he lacks speaking outside it, standing up on his 2 feet, Mr. Speaker. And the honorable member can interpolate all he wants. He's not going to be heard over the radio unless he stands up and speaks. But his silence in standing up shows, Mr. Speaker, that he supports this initiative and he accepts that the community is in serious trouble because of the challenges we face in our community with many of our brothers and sisters struggling to make ends meet. And, you know, as I said, Mr. Deputy Speaker, it was probably just 2 weeks ago that we had, or maybe a month, because time flies when you get older. But when we had the other legislation on pensions, I made the comment that, you know, we're facing a real crunch here in Bermuda at this time by the simple fact is that mandatory private pension schemes only came about 20 years ago. And so people only had the opportunity to contribute then. People were only forced to contribute then. We had the government pension, you know, for many, 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 many years before that. So to some extent, we were late for the party. That's not apportioning blame to any political party, but we were late to the party because 20 years has not allowed that much to be put into the private pensions, and now we see many people hitting the retirement age, whether you take the early retirement age, whether you go at 65, or whether you're going to work on for an extended period of time and continue to earn money and not touch your pension. So many people are hitting that retirement age with only 20 years contributions to their pension. And we're going to face this crunch for a number of years before all of those in the workforce who have many, many more years to work can build up their accounts, can have some wise investments, and then get to the retirement age. Now, we also know, Mr. Acting Speaker, that over the past 20 years, we've seen some significant market corrections, which means that for a certain period of times, the investments in pensions, because as we all know, much of the pension contributions are put into hedge funds, and they're managed, and they will go up and down according to what's happening with the confidence in the market and the market itself and those investments. So we've seen some significant corrections over those times, and it's taken preceding years after those corrections downwards to see the upward change. So in 20 years, you know, people probably have seen the growth of their pension money, but certainly with those market corrections, it hasn't been the growth that you would expect. But over a longer period of contributing through what I would say would be a normal workforce career for somebody of 40, 45 years, those corrections can be hidden much more because of the growth in the market. So we face a challenge that seniors now are retiring at rates that haven't been seen before, and because the pensions aren't sufficient to allow them to live, we have to make some of these corrections here for a short-term period. We need to recognize the fact. We need to take ownership for the fact that we're only making this 2-year hiatus because we believe people are in need of that money. And I know the government is in a very difficult position because they are faced with conversations with people on a regular basis about how we pay for our light bill, how we buy groceries, how we pay school fees, how we pay fees all across the board, Mr. Speaker. And this is one area, and I'm going to get to that, honorable member, this is one area where the government's justifying it today, but we take this with some real concerns. Because a 2% that doesn't go in over 2 years can't be caught up. It won't be caught up. And the 2% that is given, some people will accept that as a stopgap measure to help them to keep their head above the water. But that, you know, that's very difficult, in my view, to see people being comfortable treading water with this 2%. What government should do is look at stop raising taxes. If we had been more prudent in the budget this year, Mr. Acting Speaker, if land tax hadn't gone up with the $300 to impact everybody that owned a home, Bermudians would be better off. And I would say something right here now, Mr. Acting Speaker. I bet when we come to this place again, if God spares us breath in February, the government will come back and rescind that $300 going forward. Because I know members have been barraged on the streets as they canvass at functions about that $300. We put an extra burden on hardworking Bermudians who were struggling to pay mortgages on houses and jump their land tax up from paying maybe $50 twice a year to $300. That's a huge increase. If government had held back for 1 year or 2 years on raising all government fees by 5%, that could have helped hardworking Bermudians who were struggling. That could have helped struggling Bermudians who didn't have a job. Think about that, 5% across the board. Go license your car. Go get a government service. All of that 5%. All of these tax increases that are strangling and choking Bermudians and making it difficult for them to get ahead, to see hope, to have confidence in the future. If we had curtailed that back, we wouldn't be here today. Giving people the opportunity to use 2%, but taking away from a brighter future when they finally do retire. That's where the rubber meets the road here with the opposition. That's why we're so exercised. And you know what, Mr. Speaker, I bet you if members on that side sat on this side, they'd be saying the same thing that we would be saying. But it's interesting. It's interesting how members on that side are so reluctant to speak because of their reservation about actually supporting this, because they know the correct message to send is, wait a second, we could stop raising taxes. But the government wants to say, you know what, we're going to balance the budget, and to balance that budget, you need to get a lot more revenue because we're not going to stop spending.
Point of order,
So here, Mr. Speaker, we stand.
You have a point of order? It's your point of order, member.
What the honorable member is not telling people is we were on track to actually pay down the debt, but because of Morgan's point in particular, we have a problem. Why doesn't he speak about that?
That's a point of order.
Yes. Yes, sir, because he's saying that we are reluctant to speak because all we're doing is raising taxes. It's misleading the House.
Continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for that point of order. I'm happy to address it at another conversation another time. It has nothing to do with what we have here today. My point is that this is like going to the hospital, to the triage unit. When you go to the hospital and you've got something serious, you got to take a look at it. If you come in there and you're bleeding profusely from your elbow or somewhere in your chest from a stab wound and you could bleed to death, the first thing they do is take you to triage and stop the bleeding. But you still got to deal with the main injury. Still got to deal with your main injury. So here we are today. We're going to try to triage something. But how are we going to deal with the main injury? Government hasn't addressed that. Government hasn't talked about that in any way. And we could have, instead of doing this 2%, where people are saving for their future, saving for their retirement. I remember when I was younger, people talked about being a senior and being in your golden years. You never heard that? You never heard that being said at the present time? Because your golden years seem to be overshadowed by the dark cloud as we see out today. Yeah, bits of sunshine come and warm up your day, but that dark cloud with that strong cold wind is there. We got to get it back where our seniors can see those golden years. Stop taxing our seniors to death. We're going to give them 2% on a pension. Stop raising taxes, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Any further speakers? Minister, you have the floor.
Yeah, no. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I can't believe that honorable House, that side, talks about our seniors. For 5 years, Mr. Acting Speaker, they were government. And at no time, for at least 4.5 years, until it was getting close to an election, they decided to take care of our seniors. Because money doesn't grow on trees.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Point of what?
Point of order.
The honourable member is misleading the House. Because what we did during that period of time, the interim period to which he's referring, is to ensure that we maintained sufficiently low levels
That was no
of
point of order.
taxation so that we didn't have those inordinate pressures on our seniors. That is not what this government is doing.
Mr. Speaker, the honorable member misled this House. I said that they did not take care of our seniors for that 4.5 years. They did not. And they're talking about increasing taking care of our seniors. But what they did, Mr. Speaker, over the last 4.5 years, 5 years, that they increased taxes considerably, much more than this government has done over 2 years. Payroll tax went up considerably, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We decreased payroll tax.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
What's your point of order?
There appears to be some selective amnesia. The honorable member forgets that the OBA government was the first to reduce payroll tax, and the PLP continued on with the plan that we put in place. Stop raising taxes.
Mrs. Deputy Speaker, as I said before, they increased payroll tax more than this government has. We haven't increased payroll tax. We haven't. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. With changes made to the payroll tax amendment, they've captured more in payroll tax, so they have increased it, Mr. Speaker. Selective amnesia. I know it's cold today.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Acting Speaker, the honourable member, like I said, I would suggest that he goes and reads his own budget statement that the honourable member Bob Bridges did. They increased taxes on more payroll tax than this government did.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. I ask the honourable member to give some numbers and not just his selective amnesia memory.
Mr. Speaker, matter of fact, when we got in government, there was an increase on the budget book, because I was there was going to increase payroll tax even more. They were going to increase payroll tax even more. We stopped it. We froze payroll tax. Mr. Speaker, on top of that, if you checked on the land tax, check the land tax.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
What's your point of order?
I asked for some numbers to back up his assertion, which is incorrect.
Continue, Minister.
Mr. Acting Speaker. I don't, look, if I knew he was going to bring that information out, if he wants me, I can bring the information next week for him. Or I can meet with the Royal Gazette thereafter and get the information for him.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. The 13th, we're not meeting on the 5th.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is trying now to just be silly. I can present the information. We can present the information to
watch that language.
Yes, which here's mine.
Yours.
Oh, what am I saying?
You cannot refer to other members as silly.
Oh, I'm sorry. I
Not
didn't
in the
realize you
chamber.
couldn't use the word silly in this honourable house, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Acting Speaker. I thought silly was in the dictionary. That's why I wasn't sure.
Let's not go through that here.
Well, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Acting Speaker, it's clear, and I have no problem sitting down. And matter of fact, we decreased payroll tax. We froze on the top ends, but the honourable members, they increased payroll taxes. It's the facts are there, and they increased land tax. I think most of them forgot how they increased land tax on our population.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
What's your point of order, Mr. Dunn?
The honourable member. There's two people standing. I'm speaking to Mr. Speaker.
I recognize you. Take a seat, Mr. Favre.
Mr. Speaker, my comments regarding payroll tax were to the lower ARV numbers, the $300 that everybody has to pay. Let's help the people. Sorry, land tax. Let's help the people that are really struggling. That's what this bill's about. That's where we need to go. Sonny, as soon as the honourable members change the sides of the House, they forget about the struggling people. They forget about the struggling people.
Member, continue, Minister.
Mr. Acting Speaker, if you recall, because you was in this House, when honourable member Bob Richards brought the first bill for land tax, which was a very considerable high. If it wasn't for the PLP fighting hard to make sure that our seniors do not pay high land tax at the time, he forgets. He forgets. But, Mr. Speaker, let me just say this also. The honourable member, the Solstice graduate, Mr. Honourable Member Pearman, who's a lawyer, talked about that the only savings that the honourable member that spoke, Mr. Acting Speaker, talked about, and I'm just a simple Francis Patton guy. I'm just simple Francis Patton guy. And I don't explain it, because our math was probably better than it was at Salt at that time. But the honourable member, Mr. Acting Speaker, said that he based it by saying that the average person who was saving, putting aside a pension for $500, would save, I think it was $10 or...
Point of order, Mr. Acting Speaker. I'm afraid the minister is misleading the House. I thought the example I gave was very simple and clear. I suggested that there was a pension element per annum of $1,000. I took half and half from employer and employee of $500 each, and I asked the minister to clarify what 2% would be, because if I've correctly understood the numbers, 2% would be $10 from the employer and $10 from the employee. I may well be wrong. I'm not asserting this. I'm asking the minister what the situation is, because it's his bill. Thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker.
That's the point, Mr. Acting Speaker. The honourable member works out his percentage on what was paid, and it really calculations based on the salary received. So the amount that was actually being saved is much higher. So that's why I asked the honourable member sitting next to him to teach him up on that. I understand that, yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate that. But it's much higher, much higher. So he took the five.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker. Perhaps the minister could tell us what much higher means?
Mr. Acting Speaker, I can work those numbers for him, but I'll let the honourable member sit next to him to educate him later on. That's not my calculation. I just said that his numbers were totally wrong. So, Mr. Acting Speaker, we talked about that our people has the option. And if I was to encourage my family, whether they wanted to take away the 2% or save, I would encourage them to save it. I would encourage them to put it aside. But there are times when people run into some hard times, Mr. Acting Speaker, and it's possible, that it's possible that, I'll seek guidance from that 2% for an individual, and it could be 1%, but it's up to 2%. 2% per year. So 2%, it allows that person just for, I don't know, Mr. Acting Speaker, but I know of many people that's come into the Ministry of Finance when I was there, who actually were suffering, just can't afford certain things. And we're saying just for that temporary period, Mr. Acting Speaker, that they allow themselves to they can either pursue the pension and pay the 2%, or the ability to deduct it. I'm hoping that the honourable member, the member who's in, I think, in Smith Parish or in constituency number 10, that because he has the option also to reduce too, and I'm hoping that he doesn't increase or reduce his 2% by the employer side. I'm hoping that the partner for Congress Deal and Pyramid doesn't reduce that 2% for the staff. I'm hoping they don't, because they have spoken on that. I hope they don't.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
It's your point of order, Mr. Dante.
Mr. Speaker, when we get into committee, we can discuss that, because we have questions on how that's going to actually work.
Continue, Minister.
So, Mr. Speaker, let me just say this to you. It was this government that introduced the bill to do with these particular pensions. It was this government that did it. Mr. Pollock, Mr. Cox, he was the one in 1998, I believe it was, that actually bought it. So this government recognizes, no it wasn't, this government recognizes the need for some type of, I use the word, forced saving. But sometimes you ease the burden up, you push it ahead, you ease it up, push it ahead. This government recognized that. Mr. Speaker, the Acting Speaker, I understand very clearly, I was Iran. I understand very clearly, Mr. Speaker, the games that the honourable members on that side likes playing. We understand it. But we also on this side recognize...
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
What's your point of order, member?
This is impugning improper motive. It's not a game. This is a serious issue.
Continue.
Mr. Speaker, maybe I used the terminology out of context as far as... but we understand how politics does work. And so what we say, they say something different. What we say may say something different. We understand that type of analogy. Hence why the honourable member talks about increasing in payroll tax in other taxes over the years, where I can clearly lay out where they were demonstrated over the 4 years that they did. They increased payroll tax, land tax, duty on products, and other taxes much higher than this government has done over the last 2 years. So, Mr. Speaker, it's all about volunteering. Whether an individual wants to be able to do it, they don't have to do it. I personally, as a financial advisor, I would suggest they don't do it. But if they have that permit for that period and they want a relief, all we're saying is the relief is be able to be there. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.
You want to move this to committee?
Thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Acting Speaker, I move that bill be committed.
It's almost lunchtime. It's a little chilly in here. We can adjourn for lunch. Minister, you want to adjourn us for lunch and return at 2?
Yes, Mr. Acting Speaker, I move that we adjourn for lunch and return at 2 p.m.
We will return at 2 in committee. Renee Ming will have the chair.
You need to call the chair first and then adjourn.
We will adjourn. We'll do that when we come back for lunch. She's not here. She's not.
What you really should say is 2/3.